Hi again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of RV Business Capital Talk, sponsored by the Dicor Corporation. I'm Rick Kessler from RV Business. With me, as always, Sherm Goldenberg from RV Business. And joining us today is Jon Gray. Jon is for 4.5 years, the CEO at RVshare. RVshare is and let me get this right, the first and the largest online marketplace for peer-to-peer RV rentals.
That's right. Thanks for having me on, guys.
And I might inject, Rick, one of the foundational change artists, so to speak, in the industry over the last 4 or 5 years. Has virtually rebuilt a certain segment of this market.
RVshare has been around since 2012, I believe, or maybe 13, but right around that time.
13.
Okay. Jon, if you would, just give us a nice overview of RVshare, what it is, what do you do?
Yeah, so really simply, RVshare works like a Vrbo or an Airbnb does for vacation rentals. We take someone who has an RV and wants to turn it into a second source of income, and we connect them with people who want to go on RV trips. And it's really as simple as that. As an RV owner, it's free to list. You don't pay unless you get bookings. And as a renter, it's free to come browse, and you only pay if you want to book an RV.
And from what I understand, and you guys have been very good about sharing all kinds of data. Most recently, the data that caught my eye was the peer-to-peer rental is still booming, and RVshare has a 40% increase in booking revenue just over last year.
That's right. And, it's one of these things I think all of us in this industry were watching closely this year, given that we've had a lot of macro factors benefit us over the course of the last 2 years. So, COVID was obviously a really difficult time, especially when the lockdowns were taking place for every business, and ours was no exception. We went through furloughing, we cut back spending, we went from being a high growth business to having more than 10,000 cancellations over the course of a few days, kind of just like everyone else. And then, seemed like, in retrospect, it seemed like a few days. At the time, it felt like a few years. But in the month and a half that followed the lockdowns, people wanted to get outside. They, loved their families, but they were ready to spend some time in a different place, maybe not with the same people they'd been locked up with for the past several months. So they got outside, and they got outside in RVs, and we saw a tremendous, kind of exponential growth in the business during COVID. And, last year you still had a lot of the same factors, people, kind of unwilling to get on airplanes, people wanting to, have a lot of control over their surroundings. And we had a really nice growth year last year. And then I think a lot of people in this industry were looking at 2022 and saying, all right, now you have fuel prices increasing. You have a lot of the things that are traditionally bad for the RV market are happening. COVID is, still around, and it's probably going to be, but, I don't know if you guys have been to an airport recently, but they're full again. And, people have been waiting to travel, and they're taking a bit longer trips now. So all of those things should be bad for the RV rental business. And as you mentioned, we're still seeing a really nice growth. We're growing almost 40%. Memorial Day bookings were up around that 40% number as well. And, it's one of these things. Our business is still a summer business. You see most of our bookings between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So getting Memorial Day off to a good start is a good start in this business.
Jon, if you could, just to put things into a little bit better perspective, you've been there for 4.5 years as CEO. What's RVshare like now compared to when you started? Like, how many guests, how many owners?
Yeah, so when I arrived, it was a much smaller business. I would say RVshare is more than 10 times the size it was in terms of, number of people who come to rent. It's not grown quite that much on the RV owner's side, but we now list well over 100,000 RVs on the platform. So, we have a pretty much, if you want to go somewhere and you want an RV to take you there, you can find one on our site in the US, that is. We're still a US only business. So when I arrived, and my experience prior to coming to RVshare was with Verbo. It was called HomeAway at the time, but that was a business that I worked in for 12 and a half years through the sale to Expedia. And what I was most excited about there, and what I'm most excited about in the RV rental business, is I get to make travel better, and I get to help people build wonderful memories. And that's what we get to do here. And so how we go about doing that tactically is we remove friction from a really high friction experience. Most of the time, somebody who's renting an RV, it is the biggest vehicle they've ever driven, and they're a little bit freaked out about it. So we want to make it really easy for them to find an RV that meets their needs, to get them a floor plan so they can see where everybody's going to sleep. To go through, once they've picked the RV and they show up, to walk through it with the owner, to do a test drive, to make sure they're comfortable, to make sure they have, 24/7 roadside, 24/7 customer service in place, as well as solid protection products and insurances to cover them. And so we've been just all about that. One example of this that I think is it's not the biggest feature we have, but it's a good example of this, is you can come on RVshare now, put in the type of car you have, and we will only render search results for RVs, or for trailers that you can tow, that'll match with your car. And that's an example of how we like to remove friction from the category.
When a person rents peer-to-peer through your services, how do they get it physically? How do they pick it up?
So most of the time, they're going to go to where the RV is stored, which is usually an owner's driveway or a storage facility, or sometimes they'll have them in like with a fleet or a consignment shop type of thing, and they'll pick it up there. That's something like 80% of the use cases. 20% of the use cases, we do delivery. So our owners will take an RV and deliver it to the campground that you want to stay in. It will be plugged in and ready to go. And you just walk in and your vacation begins the second you get there. That's how I stayed last time I did one. And, I don't have a car that will carry a fifth wheel, but I got a fifth wheel delivered. We had a king size bed in the front. My kids were 30 feet away and could make whatever sort of noise they wanted to, and it was no big deal. And, when I got there, the air conditioner was on, and it was just basically as simple as a hotel room, but in a place that didn't look anything like a hotel. So, it's that's a part of our business that, you talk about a new thing that has gone from 0% of our business to 20 over the course of the last few years. And I expect that is a really good and reliable way to bring people into our category.
Jon, do you capture any information on the renters? Like, are they urban? Are they families? Anything like that?
We do. I kind of answered that question on two levels. One is we have to capture information on them to ensure that, they have a valid driver's license, that we run checks for them from an insurance and protection products perspective. So as an RV owner, you can feel good about the fact that whoever's renting your RV has, been vetted, at least to the extent that you can be vetted digitally, right? In terms of demographically, what these folks are like, I'd say it's really all over the map, but there's a couple of things that we aren't. And what I'd say about that is, I think a lot of people talk about van life, and it's like, this is somebody who's renting a camper van and taking it for 6 months and, quitting their job and all. We aren't that. Like there's a very small percentage of our business is people who are renting for a very long term in a camper van. In fact, a very small percentage of our business is camper vans. Okay. The other thing that we're not, and you hear this all the time, is people retire and they buy an RV and they go on a trip across country. I think people don't rent an RV and take it for a long trip across the country. These are, largely speaking, people who are booking in two profiles. One is a long weekend, so they're booking for 3 or 4 days over a weekend, or they're booking for a week, 7, 8 days, something like that. And they are typically nuclear families that are a couple of parents traveling with a couple of kids. And that's usually the experience. But, we really have it all over the place. Something we're starting to see that we didn't really see pre-pandemic is we're starting to see more international renters show up. People who, it's funny. I think a lot of people in the US are like, man, I really wish I could go to Europe. Well, there's been a lot of Europeans who have been saying, man, I really wish I could go do the Great American Road Trail. And, you're starting to see some of that come.
Rick, let me follow up the question I asked about picking up the unit. Then there's reciprocal question is, I'm done with my long weekend. I deliver it back to where I got it?
Yes, that's correct. You deliver it back to where you got it. Again, if it got delivered, the owner will come pick it up where it was delivered. If you picked it up at their house or at a consignment fleet or something like that, then you would deliver it back to where you got it. One of the things that I think will become important as this industry moves forward is some of our customers will want to pick up an RV in one place and drop it off in another. And we're going to have to evolve the business to make sure we can serve those customers as well.
What if there, John, is some damage? How does that get accounted for?
So if an RV is damaged, in most of the cases, we are taking a security deposit. And in the overwhelming majority of the cases, first of all, let me say, overwhelming majority of cases, damage doesn't occur.
Okay.
Right? That's rare. That's not something that happens all the time. When damage does occur, it almost, not all the time, but most of the time is covered by the security deposit. If it's not covered by the security deposit, it is, it's something that can then be claimed against our protection products and our insurance. And that is every sort of exposure from physical damage to, I crashed into a tree that was too low. You can guess the basics of how people damage RVs, right? I backed into something. I didn't realize this thing was as big as it was, so I clipped something when I turned. It's those types of things. And we cover all of those with our protection products on physical damage. If there's any, kind of liability exposures like a car accident or something like that, that is an insurance coverage we have in place as well. So, a big part of what we try to do is make it to where if you've rented an RV, we're taking care of as many of the considerations as we can, such that you can have an experience that feels as normal as booking a hotel. We want the idea of coming in and booking an RV and staying in it to feel as simple as booking a rental car or as simple as booking a hotel. Like that's where we want to get to with this business.
It's amazing to me because it's all remote, it's all digital. And so you're largely, and I mean this, it seems like dependent on the goodwill of the renters of America. In other words, they're straight shooters.
I think you're dependent on, look, any sort of two-sided marketplace is based on trust, right? Amazon is, eBay is, Vrbo is, Airbnb is, Turo is, you name it, right? They're all based on trust at some level. So absolutely, we're based on trust. The things as a marketplace that we do to ensure that it is a trustworthy place is we do checks on IDs. We do have solid insurance programs in place. We do have roadside in place. If you're a family and you're on a vacation and a tire blows, we want to respond quickly. We don't want, we want our response to be something you're excited about, as opposed to, I think most people know that things can happen. They just want to see that you're trying to help solve the problem, right? So that's kind of the trust piece of it. The other thing that us and every other marketplace in the world relies on heavily is third-party reviews. If you list an RV on RVshare and it's an RV that is not good to be rented for one reason or another, we'll kick it off the platform if it receives bad third-party reviews.
Very impressive.
And we have to, because if you think about what our kind of high level goal here is, to expand this category to be in the mainstream of travel, which means we're competing against the Hampton Inn, or, we're competing against Enterprise, or, so we've got to have that level of sophistication. Do we have that today? No. Have we come a long way? Yes. And we still have a ways to go.
Very impressive.
I should point out the reason why Sherman is asking you about security deposits and whatnot is he and his fraternity buddies from Indiana U are going to reunite and head out to Burning Man Festival.
Perfect.
Don't start. No,
Well,
no.
Well, I'll tell you, Burning Man is an interesting use case, right? I mean, I think a lot of RV owners will tell you, like they will write in their listing, you are not allowed to take this RV to Burning Man. They'll put tracking on it to make sure it doesn't go to Burning Man. And then I talk to other RV owners who are like, my favorite time of year is Burning Man because I make so much money by taking my RV and turning it into a second source of income when demand is really high. You know, if you kind of take this kind of back up to where this industry starts, you know, I always use the term benefit of the bargain, which is like, what are we doing for RV owners? In most cases, we're taking an asset that someone has spent a lot of money to purchase, and it sits there for 49 weeks a year. They use it for about 3 on average. We're taking that and making it to where they can cover and offset a lot of their costs. More than half of people who use RVshare cover all of their ownership cost of the RV by renting it out. Okay. So they're basically owning it for free, or, you know, getting to use it for the 3 weeks that they're using it for free. And, you know, that's something that when we look at what we're doing here, we're pretty proud of.
One other thing I know that Rick and I wanted to touch on was this wave of new buyers that we're seeing in the industry. To what extent are you working with them?
So, I mean, we work with anybody who has an RV and wants to turn it into a second source of income. The new buyers of RVs kind of remind me, this is, 10 years ago at this point. I don't know if you guys remember, but there used to be headlines all over the papers about how, millennials are not going to buy houses. And then, fast forward 10 years, the housing market's never been better because all the millennials grew up and decided they wanted a house, right? I think the same thing is going to play out with RVs, in that you have a bunch of new people coming into the market and buying RVs, and you hear, ooh, I'm going to, this RV is going to be my office, all these types of things. Yeah. I think they'll regress to a mean, and they'll be using them 3 weeks a year, and 49 weeks a year, they'll be sitting there, and we can help them turn them into a second source of income. So I'm thrilled about all the new supply that's coming onto the market. New supply is a great thing for our business, and I think, a great thing for the industry as a whole. All the manufacturers are selling quite well, and we can help bring new people to the industry. Before the pandemic, about 3 out of every 10 bookings on RVshare were people who were looking at, who were thinking about buying an RV. So they kind of came to RVshare to try it out. And, in many cases then went on to buy RVs. So I think we definitely have a symbiotic relationship with the manufacturers, and new RVs coming into the market is of course a great thing for us. Are we specifically targeting the new buyers to say, this is different? Not really. We're using the same tactics that helped us, build an inventory that's 100,000 strong. And, we're kind of continuing to build on that.
Rick, where we go from here? We've about killed our clock here.
We've killed the clock for sure. There's so many other things we could get into, and we'll save that for another time.
One I would love to talk about is fuel prices, because I think there's
one thing, yeah.
Okay, there's just such a big misconception about fuel prices, and that is to say, I think there's this idea in people's minds that fuel is expensive, so I might as well go to Europe. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the average RV trip on RVshare is about 375 miles. It's about $1.40 per gallon more expensive than it was last year to buy gas. And an average RV gets about 15 miles to the gallon. So we're talking about $35 difference this year versus last year. That's not nothing. I mean, it's, you're certainly missing out on a dinner or two, but it's not the same as buying a ticket to go to Europe. I mean, it's not that sort of trade-off. We're talking about a manageable cost difference versus a very meaningful cost difference if you look at the impact of fuel prices on airlines.
And obviously, based on your data, you're not seeing any kind of a moderation of RV rentals going on.
Not at the moment, and I do think a lot of people are talking about fuel prices, and that is something that I do want us as an industry to stay out in front of, is the idea that we are a great value travel option. Yeah. And that is true in a recession. That is true in a boom time. Like we're a great value travel option, even in a high fuel price environment.
So John, we always have to ask everyone who comes on the show, what's next? What's going to happen for RVshare going forward?
So I think we are at a really interesting time in the future of travel as a whole. And it's being defined by this work from anywhere movement and just generally flexibility in people's schedules. I think one of the learnings from the pandemic that was actually positive was that we can accomplish a lot without sitting in an office. And I think that, that can happen in the form of work from home. At RVshare, we like to think about that as a work from anywhere. We recently did a partnership with SpaceX and Starlink to get really high quality Wi-Fi into RVs. And we've heard great things about it so far in terms of the ability to do calls like this Zoom call from an RV on the road. And I see this as the biggest macro tailwind, certainly in the last 20 years of the travel industry, is that trips are going to get longer. People will still be focused on value because they're going to want to take more trips per year. So the trips per traveler, I expect to go up. The length of trips, I expect to go up. And the focus on value, I expect to, continue to be there. So I think this is a big win for discount airlines. I think it's a big win for businesses like RVshare. I think it's a big win for vacation rentals. I think it's in the long term a pretty big loss for things like commercial real estate and a pretty big loss for traditional business travel. So that's where I see the future going. In terms of what that exactly means for businesses like ours, I think it's more consumers that are out there throughout the year. And the throughout the year part, I think, is important. I mentioned earlier that we're largely a Memorial Day to Labor Day business, and that's written around summer for school calendars. And as we get more flexible in all of these things, I think what you'll see is seasons expand. I think fall foliage is a huge winner because that usually falls out of that category, but it's one now where people will have flexibility to travel there more. So I think the future is travel gets better and it gets more flexible, and there's many and different ways of accessing it.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
One of the things I got out of that was, Sherman, you can still stay connected to work while you're on your way to and from Burning Man. Okay.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it, Rick.
John, thank you again for your time. It was great. Real great.
Appreciate it.